What if I told you I suffer from an invisible illness, one that affects 1 in 10 women worldwide but is kept a secret? What if I told you that its symptoms and impact can be debilitating and that some days I can't function because of it? What if I told you there are more women like me and that you'll have known at least one of them, and yet their stories, like mine, are hard to tell? So we don't. What if I told you it takes 7 years to diagnose because it's a woman's problem? But what if I told you that things are changing? That women are sharing more, talking more, and that's a start. I wanted to reach out through this documentary to share their experiences, their journeys, and more importantly, their pain, so that people can understand more, to empathise, and to support. What if I told you I have endometriosis? I have suffered with this since I was a teenager.
I don't know if I got used to it.
And I know the strength it takes to just keep going sometimes. But there is strength in numbers and in telling our stories and in what we have to overcome.
Quite outgoing, so I would paint the smile on and just crack on.
And to see so many people, so many doctors who said that it was just stress. So I just thought it was down to me.
The purpose of this documentary is just to tell the truth. Alright, ready? My name is Charlotte Jacobs and I suffer with endometriosis, adenomyosis and PCOS. I decided to start this project because, having suffered from endometriosis since I was 14, I felt like I knew I wasn't talking to women about it. I knew I wasn't connecting with women about it, and so I wanted to do something about that. And I also think that the women that I do know who have the condition, once I started talking to other women and once I discovered the kind of endo-sister community, the stories were really similar in a lot of ways and were really harrowing in a lot of ways, and no one's talking about them. Why shouldn't we be sharing that with each other? And especially as women, why shouldn't we be telling each other, like, I struggle with this too, and find empathy and compassion in that? But there are a whole host of women that I've been speaking to, and not all with endometriosis, some with PCOS, some with fibroids, some with adenomyosis. So it's more than just endometriosis as well. It's more about menstrual health as well, and just ending general stigma and getting women to talk, to tell these stories and to get people's attention. Because I think that's the problem, is this has been going on for a long time, but we need to get people's attention.
This condition affects 1 in 10 women worldwide. Endometriosis is a gynecological condition whereby cells similar to those found within the womb are found elsewhere in the body. Those cells become inflamed and bleed internally, causing adhesions where organs are fused together. This causes symptoms such as severe pain, both during periods and chronically, pain that isn't normal, excessive bleeding where a woman can become anemic from blood loss, bloating that is also beyond normal and is known as endobelly, fatigue leaving a woman unnaturally tired and affecting her daily life, and many other symptoms as well.
I remember having really, really painful periods leading up to that in school. So they were always painful and very heavy. But around the age of 18, I started getting problems with my kidney. I had cysts, and the pain and the passing really bad clots, very heavy bleeding, excruciating pain. My periods would last for much longer than they should.
My period started at 11, which was quite early, but I didn't really know anything wasn't normal until I was 14. I had very heavy periods, always have done, but I didn't know it wasn't normal. And all of a sudden I got this pain that was absolutely excruciating. And I remember going into the house, and it came out of nowhere, and begging, just crying to my mum. I was in an absolute state. So eventually she called an ambulance, and when they got me to the hospital, they found that I had a ruptured ovarian cyst. I had to have surgery for it. So they gave me the diagnosis of PCOS first, and I got that at 14. But with endometriosis, I didn't really know. My mum had it, but because I kept having ruptured cysts and we didn't know, we'd been told I had PCOS and not endometriosis, so we didn't really know. We sat on it for a while, but it was actually my mum eventually who repeatedly saw me unable to get into school, unable to get out of bed for days of the month, the amount of pain that I would complain about all the time, and the bleeding. I mean, for instance, bleeding so bad that I wouldn't want to go out, bleeding so bad that, I would become anemic, I'd feel faint, I'd feel lightheaded. And these things all kind of started progressively from the age of 14. It was 14 really that this all kicked off for me. Pain, bleeding, bloating, fatigue, and then things like anxiety and stuff as well. So anxiety and depression, I think, in the later teenage years, that started to come up.
It was probably late teens, early 20s when I was dancing. I'd always had heavy periods, from however old I was, I think I was 12. So I just thought that was completely normal. But when I saw what other girls considered to be heavy periods, it was not even in the same league. It's bloated belly, feeling tired, being anemic. But yeah, definitely the heavy bleeding and clotting, and that was the worst. And then the pains as well, that was quite... I don't know if I got used to it.
I mean, my personality, it affected my personality, my confidence, and I felt alien, I felt other. I knew other girls didn't seem to have as many issues with their periods as I did, so I felt like somebody who wasn't normal. But I think the other thing was the loss of being active. I was a very active teenager. I did horse riding, I was a dancer, if there was an activity to do, I would do it. Like, I absolutely adored the challenge. And the more I went through my teenage years, the more I just couldn't do that. And that was the beginning of the process of me learning my body has limits that, my mind sometimes just doesn't quite understand.
It's really weird. It's kind of like a dragging feeling. Like, I'll be absolutely fine 1 minute, and then all of a sudden it's like a closing up feeling. And I just think, right, everything's going to annoy me now. And it kind of is, I know I'm being moody or snapping, but I can't. And it's going to sound really selfish, I don't want to snap out of it, because you just think, this needs to come out. It's going to come out now. Very sorry, everyone. But yeah, my main thing is I shut down. Like, I could go very quiet, shut down, and yeah.
It's quite emotive looking back now, because I realise actually that the illness and the fact that my periods were different to other people's meant that I wasn't so energetic, I wasn't so good at PE, because I didn't want to be, or some days I was in so much pain they sent me home a few times.
How I dressed was a major thing. Like, there were certain things I would just walk past in a shop because everyone was wearing. I remember the fashion was white linen trousers. Like, everyone had a pair of white linen trousers, and I was like, I just cannot even begin to buy a pair of those, because I knew that I would not feel confident, because you always check it. Even if you're not on your period, I would intermittently bleed sometimes as well, so I couldn't even plan on when I could wear things like that. And yeah, massive confidence thing. If I was in like a swimsuit, you know, stomach would be out here, and yeah, just the confidence thing, and being tired all the time.
Having no confidence in I could walk out, you know, and I wouldn't know by the end of the day whether I'd be bleeding or not, whether I'd be in pain or not. So I could walk out my house that morning one person and come back a completely different person by the end of it. So having the instability of not knowing how your body's going to behave and stuff like that as a young female is, quite crippling, to be honest. Did you talk to friends about your periods?
No, I didn't. Well, I think naturally at that age, you're quite embarrassed. So at that age, I think a lot is embarrassing, and the last thing they're going to talk about really are periods, because that's innately personal. And not only that, I could talk about it as an older woman much later, but even as a young woman and from school, you don't know what the hell's going on.
As a young woman, how easy did you find it to talk about what you were experiencing?
With my mum and my aunt, really easy, because like I said before, my aunt suffered as the same as well. But other people, I'm quite outspoken anyway, but sometimes I'd be having these conversations and people would look at me as if to say, oh, don't talk about those sort of things, you know. But I try to keep talking about it because it was something that I was going through.
I would never have spoken to friends about it, ever. I would never have discussed my periods with friends. The only person I could talk to about any of this stuff was my mum. And the only reason I could talk to my mum was because I'd watched her as a child go through these things. So that was the only reason she was the person to open up to. But other than that, no, I wouldn't have spoken to anyone. You just don't bring it up. Why would you, I guess?
Now, endometriosis is out there a bit more. Like we've discussed in our family that we know for a fact probably that my grandma had it. My mum definitely, because I remember trying to go into the room where mum was resting and dad coming to the door, and I'd got in a little bit and just seeing mum curled up in the fetal position. And mum was never diagnosed with endometriosis. We know it's kind of inherited now, we know that, but in biology lessons in school and things like that, I don't think they knew enough.
I mean, from obviously a very young age, so I had her when I was 20, it was never not spoken about, because as a little girl, we would always go to the toilet together in like shopping centres and stuff, and if I was having a period, she would see such, and she would ask the questions when she was little, so it was always, and I'd never sort of say, oh no, don't look at that, you know. I was like, oh well, this is what happens to mummy, and it's why mummy has to go to the doctor sometimes and all that sort of stuff. So I never really shied away from it at all. So it was just never not spoken about. So she's always grown up knowing that this is what happens to me. Not to everybody, but to me, definitely.
Pain is the number one. Pain was the all over. Pain would affect my social life, pain would affect my sleep cycle, but it did eventually become too much. And when it became too much, all the things that I loved as a young woman, so my friends, my relationship, my, you know, like the theatre was my home, was my place of, you know, comfort and social, all of those things became a loss, all of those things. And so I think when that happens to you as a young person, it starts to shape who you are a lot more. It's just more formative. So pain was very formative for me.
Pain that I was suffering from the endometriosis and where things were stuck up in my body, and the amount of endometriosis that was there was just unbelievable and difficult to describe. but I'll try in terms of being in the fetal position, lying down, is about the only way you can get rid of the pain with a hot water bottle. It got so chronic for me that I couldn't actually cope with day-to-day life and living, and that was when they decided to give me some painkillers. I was going backwards and forwards to school, I needed to carry shopping, I was, you're really active, and I couldn't function. And so in the end, I think it must have been about after 15 trips to my GP, pleading every time that I couldn't cope. I do remember one day though, a really lovely nurse who said to me, "This isn't your fault. You have to take the painkillers because there is no other option." And what comes with that is a stigma.
Obviously, I've always been open to talk about it, but I don't think people ever understood it was quite as bad, because I would still do plays and shows. I would, get dressed up. I'm quite outgoing, so I would paint the smile on and just crack on. And it was only the people that really knew me, or might have had to share a toilet with me, or the dressing room with me, that actually. I was in one show, and one day my belly was flat and the costume fitted and everything, and the next day I went in and they were shocked. I said, yeah, during rehearsals, t-shirt and jeans, you don't see it, but because you crack on with it, some people just don't get it. Most people don't get it.
Did you know it takes 3.5 years to travel around the world? It takes 7 years on average to get endometriosis diagnosed. It took me 9. I was on my 3rd lap around the world. And I think travelling around the world would be easier and less painful for sure.
My endometriosis diagnosis came when I was 19. We actually paid though for a private gynaecologist because we'd been back and forth with about 5 different doctors by this point. By the time I was 19, I'd already had 4 surgeries, but all of those surgeries were for ruptured ovarian cysts. So we assumed if you've had a surgery and a doctor's been inside and seen around, they would know if you had endometriosis. But I had 5 different doctors see me. I had 4 surgeries, and all of them missed it. All of them. So it wasn't until we paid to see an endometriosis specialist, because my mum, obviously, I was lucky. My mum knows what endo is. She's got, because she has it herself. My mum basically kind of became a bit of an advocate for me and fought for me and said, no, I think she's got endometriosis. I think she's got the same thing that I have. And once we got that appointment, they booked me in for a laparoscopy. They did a scan, and the second that she did the scan, it was extremely painful. And she said, I think we should do a surgery. I was booked in. I had the surgery, and when I came round, she basically said to me, you definitely have endometriosis. So it's not a little bit, it's a lot, it's everywhere. And that was the first ablation surgery I had.
I had my daughter when I was 20, so before then I had heavy periods, like that was what I thought it was, and period pain. It did kind of get worse after I had Emily. It was just so sort of early to mid 20s, I think, and just I still just thought it was heavy periods. So just going on a pill, coming off a pill, trying this, trying that, various different things. But it was only when I was probably in my mid-20s that they sort of said, oh, well, let's look into this. But it took until I was at least 30, I think, for somebody to actually tell me that, oh, you've got fibroids. And that was the first thing. And then obviously from then to hysterectomy, it was kind of on and off, 6 months, scan, year, just every 6 months to a year, something different pain, a different cyst, a different fibroid. And then eventually it all just got too much, and they said, oh, you've had significant change. And and then hysterectomy.
I think my symptoms began to get really bad. So I see at the beginning of my endometriosis around the age of 18. But in actual fact, so I struggled for about 3 years, but then I fell pregnant with my first child. And so they say that being pregnant does actually kind of keep it at bay. So I think I had problems in the pregnancy, but with pain and stuff, and I did actually suffer some bleeding. Two years later, in the meantime, going backwards and forwards to the doctors with uncontrollable bleeding, the pain. I was getting lots of different diagnoses and different opinions, but nobody was really doing much. It was just painful periods, and that's what happens. So I had no pain relief, I had no guidance what to do next. I literally just went, and I remember travelling home from that appointment and feeling so helpless. I was finally able to speak to a doctor who said, right, given your symptoms, he said the only way to find out whether you have this, which is what he thought it was, so he was saying he thinks it's endometriosis. He said, but we need to have a look, because the only way of really seeing what's wrong with you and those symptoms is to do a laparoscopy. And I'll never forget it. That was my diagnosis, really. That was the time I got my diagnosis, but in a very bad way. I remember being quite groggy and coming round from the anaesthetic in my bed in an open ward, and no doctor, no nurse to be seen. And as I became more aware, I looked round on my bedside table and there was a fact sheet about endometriosis. And that was how I found out that's what I'd got. And I might add as well, when I say fact sheet, there are about 6 bullet points on there about what endometriosis is. It wasn't really that factual. But I remember calling a nurse and saying, what is this? Does this mean this is what I've got? Oh yeah, that's what you've got. Eventually I saw the doctor who, sent me home with some painkillers and stuff, but not much info apart from that. All I was given was, this is what you have. It's incurable. That was the diagnosis that I was given, was just that I had endometriosis and it was incurable. I was told very little, and I have to be honest about that. I was told very little. I wish I still had the fact sheet that I was given, and I remember going home and feeling pleased in some way, like elated that I wasn't mad and that my symptoms were down to something.
They knew I had fibroids, and they knew I had ovarian cysts at this point. But I was still getting this really dragging pain that was more than normal, whatever normal is. And he said, right, obviously the on-top scan never ever worked properly. It always had to be an internal scan. As soon as he even began to insert that, I sort of flinched, as I always did, and he was like, are you always in this much pain when you're scanned? I was like, yeah, every time. And when I have smear tests and this, and he said, well, you shouldn't be. This should be, it shouldn't be comfortable, but it shouldn't be painful. And that's when he said, right, well, I can tell you for now, you've definitely got, I'm going to say it wrong again, adenomyosis. he said, have you ever been told that before? And I said, no. And this was just the guy doing the scan. I'd never even heard of it. I'd heard of endometriosis, but I'd never heard of it just concentrated to the womb muscle.
I remember going to a particular doctor who I will never forget, because he just turned around and told me basically that I wasn't woman enough to bear the pain, and that I needed to man up, but in a woman's way.
I was sent down the route of IBS. I had various investigations into my kidneys that didn't really turn out anything, but they were investigating that. There were other things that went wrong with my health that I think were red herrings. I think they encouraged the doctors to look elsewhere and not to look at what was actually causing the problem. But the other misdiagnosis, the one that really, really hurt, the one that I'll never forget, when I went in, it was around my GCSEs, so I was about 15, 16, and I'd gone in with very bad pain, bloating, the usual, thought might have a cyst, and they did a scan and the scan came back normal. And so he turned around to me and he said, I think this is about your GCSEs. He said, I think this is, anxiety. He took my mum to one side and said that he thought I was trying to get out of my exams, and that if I wasn't trying to get out of my exams, that I was, suffering from a mental health condition.
But I was so upset that he thought it was all in my mind and that I was trying to get some kind of attention because things were bad at home.
And I remember one doctor's appointment, GP appointment, I was asking about, I can't even remember which one it was, fibroids, endosis, whatever, I can't remember. But I literally got a printout from web.com or whatever it was. And I thought, well, I could have found that out myself, but thanks for the info. Yeah, it was a bit strange.
I've been to see so many people, so many doctors who'd said that it was just stress. So I always thought it was down to me. And then I remember going back that day and he'd written on the top of the piece of paper, "You are not mad."
So one of the treatments they tried was to put me on tranexamic acid tablets, which are huge, they're like torpedoes. And I was really excited because I thought, they sort of made me think it was just going to dry up everything and I would have these wonderful, happy little periods that just came and went. And it was more or less exactly the same. But then I kind of thought, I'll carry on taking them because what if it isn't the same? What if I've got a lot worse and they actually are making a difference? So I just kind of took these massive tablets, not really knowing if they were doing anything or not, because I was still bleeding really heavily.
But the migraines with the pill were terrible. And then I had the Mirena coil put in. They gave me a Mirena coil and I've had one in situ ever since. It hasn't stopped bleeding, which is what it was meant to do. So now they're thinking that actually the Mirena coil could be causing me to have more cysts, so it could actually be causing us more issues. But the reason that I stuck with the Mirena is because before that they tried me on GnRH analog hormones, and the aim of those hormones is to put you into a chemical menopause. Those hormone treatments were the worst years of my life. I mean, the migraines, the sickness, mood swings. I felt like an entirely different person. Not only was I suffering with all the condition, everything that the condition can bring, but then on top of that, they'd now added a hormone treatment that wasn't working on the condition. It was about 3 years that I did a couple of different attempts. We tried Zoladex injections. That was for 3 months. And that's the other thing. So the injection for Zoladex was a 3-month injection. Now that medication and I didn't respond well to each other. I had migraines the whole time. And I didn't know when I got the injection that was going to last 3 months, that I'd get migraines. So then they gave me this injection, and for the 3 months that followed, I couldn't do anything about it. It wasn't like a tablet that I could just stop taking and say that's making me sick. I had 3 months of migraines from that injection. Yeah, so hormone treatments and the Mirena coil. I've also had a pain, like a nerve block before. So that was where the pain team basically said, what we're going to do is cut the signal from your nerves to your brain from your pelvic cavity, because we can't do anything about the pain at the moment and what's causing the pain. You're on a waiting list, etc. But what we can do is basically tell your body stop that signal from being sent. So I had that done, where they inject a anaesthetic to the nerves to stop the pain, and that did help for a while actually, but it's a really short fix. It's like 6 weeks, and then you have to go back and do the whole thing again, and it's a big needle and it's a whole thing. So I will say one thing about treatment, and that is that I haven't had one treatment, not one, for endometriosis that wasn't in some way completely invasive. Like, because even if it's hormone, or even if it's the hormones, that's an invasive treatment because it invades the way you work, the way you live, the way everything. So not just physically invasive, but as in invasive in your life. Nearly every treatment I've had to do for endometriosis has affected my life much bigger than you just take a tablet and it goes away. You know, you trade off. So you go, okay, well, I'm taking this for the endometriosis and it gives me this.
And I might add that having painkillers does bring another problem with it, because then you get constipated, and if you're constipated, my endometriosis was and has always been found around certain points, which was my uterus, somewhere they call the pouch of Douglas, which is between the uterus and the back, and on the ligaments as well. So I always had it towards the back of my female anatomy, if you get what I mean.
You had a bad experience with the Mirena?
Yeah, I think they wanted to try everything before I had sort of surgeries. So they said, oh, this will be great. It will, strip the womb lining down, and, that's where you've got your build up, blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, okay, let's give it a go. Because at this time you're desperate and you just believe whatever they say. And she said, you might experience spotting for a few weeks before it starts to work properly. I was like, okay, give it time. And 9 months later, I was in more pain than I was before, still having heavy periods, plus I put on about 2 stone. So I said, no, this really isn't working for me. And after 9 months, I felt I'd given it enough time. And they removed it, to which, just in the doctor's surgery, and it was embedded, which I didn't know at the time, in a fibroid. So when she was trying to remove it, it was the most excruciating pain. Probably of the whole time I was suffering with symptoms and stuff, that was probably the worst. It was so bad. I mean, I can laugh about it now, but at the time it was absolutely horrific.
Holistically, there are definitely things you can do to live better, even though, but again, that's on you. That's nothing a doctor's ever prescribed. That's living healthier, eating healthier, doing exercise, all those things.
So I've had about 14 surgeries for endometriosis and PCOS. Of the surgeries I've had for endometriosis, most of them were ablation. There are 2 types of surgery for endometriosis. You can have ablation or excision. The difference between ablation and excision is a bit like cutting the grass. With ablation, you use a lawnmower, so you're taking the top level off, but you leave the root behind. With excision, they actually cut out the root, so it's a much more involved surgery, and it has to be performed by a specialist. But it does give much better results. My personal experience was that I kept having ablation surgeries, I was having hormone treatments, I really wasn't getting anywhere. So I started looking for somebody who would consider doing an excision surgery for me. That fight took 5 years. It took me so long to find a specialist and to then be able to actually get in front of the specialist. And once I did get in front of the specialist, she was absolutely lovely, brilliant. Straight away, she signed me up for the excision surgery, and after waiting however many months, we did eventually get to that day. When I got to that day, I'm quite used to the process of having surgery now, but I was quite aware it was a different treatment, so there was a lot of hope tied to that. The surgery itself lasted a couple of hours. I was very uncomfortable, and I did have complications after the surgery. However, once I had recovered from the actual surgery itself, the difference was unbelievable. In this past year alone, I have lived more, I have just done more, I have been me more than I had in a very long time. And that surgery offered me a chance to get back to who I was, or at least who I felt I was before the endometriosis took hold. It's not a permanent fix. There is no cure for endometriosis, unfortunately. But that surgery I will always be grateful for, because this documentary wouldn't exist if I hadn't had that surgery. Now, there are only 200 excision specialists in the world, and yet there are 176 million women with endometriosis. It's such an important treatment, and it helped me so much that I really do strongly suggest, if there was any girls who asked me who had endo, I do suggest that excision is the better treatment. Excision is the gold standard treatment that we have at the moment for endometriosis. So I'm in the hospital at the moment. I came in on Monday with extreme pain and bleeding. I was found out to have ovarian cysts, and that one of them has ruptured. I'm going to be referred back to my specialist, and hopefully she'll be able to sort all of this out again.
I've lost friends over the years because of that. They've fallen away because I'm classed as, unreliable or, flighty or whatever because of my illness. I'm not well enough to go out sometimes, or I have to renege on an activity that we were going to do. And when you've done that a few times, sometimes that's really hard for the other person to cope with, because you then become, trying to think of the word, in their eyes unreliable, because there's a possibility that if they make an arrangement with you, that you may renege on that, and that's hard for the friendship. But a huge part of my life has been affected by the endometriosis and the limits that it puts on me as a person, and it does shape your personality as well, because you can't go through something like that, and the emotions and the pain and the struggles, you can't go through that without that forming you. I think probably that's a huge one for me, that the pain and the struggle, it made me feel alone. And I was desperately alone inside. Even though I was with family, even though I was with people that loved me, I felt alone, because it was only me that was dealing with that, and nobody understood. They could try because they loved me.
My main sort of diagnosis came at the beginning of a new relationship, when they started saying, like, this is what you have, this is what we're going to try and do. So you're kind of on this roller coaster of ups and downs, not really knowing where you are. But luckily, my husband now, just my partner at the time, was really helpful, really supportive, hated seeing me suffering. So every time they said, right, let's try this, it's like, well, I just want it to make you better. That's what he said over and over again. Yeah, so it's actually quite nice to have someone that, whether he fully understood it, I don't know, but neither did I, to be honest. So it was really nice, but obviously we were sprung into the whole conversation of, right, if we do an ablation, you know, the likelihood of having children is 0. So if you were thinking of having children, and then obviously after that it was hysterectomy talk, so we were kind of put into that conversation really, really early. I think probably not even 6 months into our relationship, because, you know, he's going on a few casual dates and stuff, so it's like, I don't want to like that, by the way. This is what happens to me. But yeah, I think the more we sort of saw each other and stuff, the more sort of apparent it was. And then I just said, you know, but luckily, not luckily for them, but his sister and mum and niece all have symptoms. So they've had hysterectomies, his niece has had cysts and treatments and stuff. So it was, again, he knew about it.
So the next thing that happened to me was actually that I got pregnant again, but I had a miscarriage. So that was a huge thing, a bad time, very upsetting.
I didn't know anything was wrong until I wanted a baby. I never really struggled with symptoms, which I know I'm lucky for. But I'd been with my partner since we were teenagers, and we had waited until the right time. We tried. Eventually, I went to a doctor and they ran tests and referred me to a specialist. My best friends are both pregnant, and I work with children, so it's on my mind all the time. And I know he struggles with it too. I feel guilty about something that isn't my fault, and I mourn what I've always wanted, what I still want. We will keep trying though.
It's really important to acknowledge that sometimes completely out of your control, but you know, you will have bouts of depression when you have endometriosis because of your circumstance. But when I'm healthy, when I'm feeling, you know, on my better days, there is a better mentality that goes with it as well. Mental health wise, it became accumulative for me, the suffering became accumulative. I'd gone too long, way too long like that. I was fighting to see the doctors and to get an excision surgery at the time. It had affected my relationship at the time in so many different ways. And what actually happened was that I think when you have endometriosis, because you have to keep going, you go and 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 you go, and then something just breaks, it just snaps and you just can't anymore. Or at least that was my experience. And so I got to a point where I found that my life was kind of crumbling around me because of the endometriosis, and I could literally name why I could lay the blame at Endo's door. And I broke. I had enough, and I did actually reach a point mentally where I didn't want to wake up again, because I didn't want to wake up again to pain. And I genuinely got all the way to the point of knocking on that door, to the point of, you know, contemplating suicide, because I just didn't want to wake up in pain. And I knew that there was no other, at that point, there was no other option. There would be pain, that was a given. So how that plays on your mind is really important. There's no stability, both physically or mentally. And I think that instability can be really dangerous.
I think the fact that it affects only women is one of the reasons why it takes 7 years to get to diagnosis, for instance. I think that, if it affected, I don't want to be too sexist, but if it affected men as well in the same way, then I think maybe we would have got to that a bit quicker. And if if people understood as a whole, because they've been through it, men and women, then that thing would have been more, recognised a lot quicker. And this is one of those situations where you can't make somebody else understand. It's just something that women go through, and that isolates them in terms of getting, people to understand. A lot of most of the people I saw for the problem, the gynecologists were men.
Yeah.
And although they might be good gynecologists because they've read the manual and they're very, they've got 10 out of 10 in their class, the empathy for what you're going through is not present a lot of the time.
Have you ever used the phrase women's problems to make your situation more comfortable for other people, or to hide behind?
Yeah, definitely. I used to work, I used to have a male boss when I worked in the shop, and if I was unwell, I couldn't go in, or was suffering and needed to keep nipping out to the loo and stuff, I would use that, just because he was really unapproachable as a human being anyway. I said it's women's problems, and I kind of tried to go into it a bit. I've got a hospital appointment, and he went, "Oh no, right, that's enough. Women's problems is enough." Quite often, I would take my letters in from the hospitals, scan them, and say, "This is why I'm off," and it was on my file, so they knew about it.
It's still, even in our enlightened age, as we like to think we are at the moment, it's still a bit of a taboo.
My body is a cage, beautiful, broken, capable of surviving. My torturer, strong, giving me hell. Pain, not what defines me.
With what was the sex ed video, so not menstrual health for good for the girls or anything like that. In with that sex ed video, you'd have, a rundown of, during puberty, this is what happens. But that rundown was about what happens to a normal person. So that rundown was normally when you go through puberty, this is what happens. And they laid that out to us of, this is what's normal. And that's all we got. So then when you start your period and you're in that bathroom and you're like, this is a lot of blood, but I guess I've never had one before, and they did say that you'd bleed, and they did say that it'd be uncomfortable, so I guess this is normal. If you've not been armed with what to look out for that is wrong, how the hell are you ever going to be able to know what's going on in your own body? It's not enough to arm people with, this is what happens to normal people. But for the 1 in 10 girls sitting in those classrooms who aren't being told, because the other thing is there's such a crossover between PCOS, endometriosis, adenomyosis, there's a huge crossover. So why aren't we telling girls, if you have pain intermittently, or if you have chronic pain, these are things that could be, conditions, and these conditions have treatments and, medications and all of these things, rather than me and every other woman who's gone through it, and the girls who are going to go through it, sitting there going, well, I know what's normal, and I don't know if this isn't normal, so I guess I'll just carry on.
It's a horrible feeling to go on having something chronic and not be armed with what that's going to mean for your life, how you can tell your family and friends about it. Because if that information isn't out there, then it's down to you to tell them.
It's a woman's lot. That's it. We need to arm girls more. And also to just stop the awkwardness of, if you do need to see a doctor, see a damn doctor. Do you know what I mean? Like, not only do girls need to know what they need to look out for, but they need to know when to see a doctor.
And then obviously you go on Dr. Google and find out a bit more yourself.
Is Dr. Google a friend of yours? Has it had to be?
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody, as soon as they get a pain or whatever, they go on there, and especially when someone gives it a name, you're straight away on their web doc, Google.
Your friends and loved ones can look it up.
I was lucky because I have a mum who has it, and that was an invaluable, resource to me. Mum having it, even though hers was different and it comes out differently in each woman, that was incredibly good for me. It gave me a support system right out the off. But truthfully, self-research, going on the forums and speaking to the other women. It's the other women who have educated me more than anything. Being a part of the Facebook groups and seeing a new woman come up and go, I'm having these symptoms and I've been told I've got endometriosis. Is this normal? And seeing 120 women flood that page and go, of course it's normal. This is what happens to me too. That's where I got my information from. Never came from any doctor. Never came from any sex ed class. All came from the women. All came from the women talking to me about their conditions. So that's why we've got to keep doing it, but that's why we need to do it more.
But you talking at the theatre bar,
Yeah.
to me about
People
it.
that probably didn't want to know about it.
No, but in a good way, because
Yeah.
what that did for me was I then saw a woman outside of my
Yeah.
circle
Exactly.
talking about it.
Yeah.
It is an alone battle, and that's why I think women who are made more aware now of the battle and the fact that there are millions, thousands of women out, the 1 in 10 of women out there that have endometriosis should band together, because there is nobody else that understands it the same as somebody going through it.
Do you think that if we make conversation about this a bit easier, that this can become a bond between women?
Yeah, definitely. Because even like from the local theatre company, speaking to your mum, she was probably one of the first women that I'd spoken to other than family that we knew we got each other kind of thing. And then when she sort of said, oh, Charlotte suffers, and it was just easy to talk. And I just think that would be nice if everyone could be as open as that, not just women that have suffered with it. Like if it was just a thing people talk about, like having a cough, having a cold. Why can't people talk about wounds?
Endometriosis has always been here, and while things stay as they are, always will. But there are ways we can bring about change. In the face of a global pandemic affecting everyone and their way of life, to focus now on a condition that affects 1 in 10 women is important. For all of us being locked in our homes, having to change how you live your life, you each have an empathy for part of the experience that is living with the condition. Empathy, understanding and support have been brought out in so many of us over the course of the way this world has changed. We need to apply that to this. Treatments and surgical interventions can go some way to helping so many women, but it's not enough and it doesn't work for all. I know that this film cannot begin to cover the range of stories and experiences that are ongoing, but it's a start. Compassion is a start. Honesty is a start. Talking is a start. For an illness that is so individual and personal, the journeys so far have been lonely. That needs to change. But it can change. For the 1 in 10, for the warriors, it has to. So let's make a start.
Because if you're not in pain, you're bleeding. If you're not bleeding, you're bloating. If you're not bloating and bleeding and in pain, you're tired. So it's literally like a vicious circle.
Let's have a look.